The alien fleet thought human ships needed fuel. Then Earth's Fleetship crossed their entire border. Far beyond the edge of human maps, in a region of space that glowed faintly with old starlight, the Vakari Concord ruled like a quiet but firm hand. The Concord was not one people, but three joined together, after centuries of war and peace. The Threll were tall and thin, with hard shells and clicking voices. The Mornasi lived half their lives in water tanks built into their ships, since their homeworld was mostly ocean. The Skarn were short, strong, and slow to trust anyone outside their own kind. Long ago, these three species fought each other across 100 star systems. Then, worn down by loss, they signed a treaty and built something new. The Vakari Concord. A union meant to keep the peace among themselves and keep outsiders far away. For over 300 years, the Concord had one great rule that shaped how they saw the galaxy. Every ship needs fuel, every fleet needs a supply line. Every war, in the end, is won or lost not by the biggest guns, but by who runs out of fuel first. This idea was so deep in Vakari thinking that it shaped their whole civilization. Their scientists spent generations building better fuel storage. Their engineers built refueling stations along every trade route, every border, every quiet corner of space where a ship might need to stop and drink from a tank of compressed hydrogen or refined star metal fuel cells. Their military built entire strategies around cutting off an enemy's fuel before ever firing a single shot. To the Vakari, a fleet without fuel was not a fleet at all. It was a graveyard waiting to happen. So when the first reports came in about a new species called humans, the Vakari analysts did what they always did. They studied the enemy's fuel. It started small. A Vakari patrol ship, drifting along a quiet border lane near a dead star, picked up strange radio chatter. The signals were rough, simple, almost childish compared to Vakari communication arrays. But the patrol captain, a Threll named Kes Marrow, was curious enough to follow the signal to its source. What she found was a human supply ship, battered and slow, limping toward what looked like an abandoned mining station. The ship was small, barely larger than a Vakari scout vessel, and it moved like it was tired. Kes watched from a distance as the human ship docked at the station, and stayed there for nearly 2 full days before moving on. Kes sent her report up the chain. It said simply, "Humans use small ships. Humans need long stops to refuel. Humans are not a threat." That report became the seed of everything that followed. Over the next several years, more encounters happened, each one adding to the same story. Human trade ships stopping at neutral stations for days at a time. Human scout vessels drifting quietly near gas giants, clearly gathering raw fuel from the atmosphere. Human warships, when spotted at all, always seemed to travel in short hops, moving from station to station, like tired travelers looking for the next inn. The Vakari Intelligence Office, run by a sharp and careful Skarn named Doran Vek, built a full picture from these reports. Humans, he concluded, were a young species with weak engines and old technology. Their ships burned fuel fast and could not travel far without stopping. If war ever came, all the Concord would need to do was cut off the human supply lines, and the whole human fleet would grind to a halt like a wagon with no horse. Doran Vek was not a foolish man. He rose through the ranks of Vakari Command because he checked his facts twice and trusted careful thinking over pride. But even careful men can be wrong when they only see part of the picture. What Doran did not know, what none of the Vakari knew, was that the ships they had been watching were the oldest and slowest ships humanity had. Earth's real fleet. The ships built in secret shipyards orbiting Jupiter and hidden behind the rings of Saturn were something else entirely. And one of those ships was about to prove it. Back on Earth, in a quiet meeting room deep under the Rocky Mountains, a small group of officers and engineers gathered around a table. The room had no windows, only screens showing star charts and ship blueprints. At the head of the table sat Admiral Elena Cross, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had spent 30 years in the fleet, starting as a young pilot and rising through every rank until she commanded the newest and strangest ship humanity had ever built. That ship was called the UES Meridian, and it was not like anything that had come before it. For most of history, human warships worked the same way every other ship in the galaxy worked. They burned fuel, they carried tanks, and when the tanks ran low, The ships had to stop somewhere and refill. This was true for Earth's early scout ships, true for its trade vessels, and true for its first generation of warships built during the early years of expansion into deep space. But 10 years ago, a small team of scientists working under Dr. Amara Voss made a discovery that changed everything. They found a way to build a power core that did not burn fuel in the normal sense. Instead, it pulled a tiny, steady stream of energy from the quantum foam that fills all of space. The same strange background hum that scientists had studied for over a century but never learned to use. The core was small, safe, and almost impossible to run dry. A ship built around it would never need to stop for fuel. It could run for decades without ever touching a refueling station. The discovery was kept secret. Earth's leaders knew that if word got out too soon, before a ship existed to prove it worked, no one would believe it, and worse, enemies might try to steal the technology before it was ready. So for nearly 10 years, engineers built the Meridian in total secrecy, hidden in shipyards that officially did not exist, using workers who signed contracts promising decades of silence. The Meridian was massive, nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, built not just as a warship, but as a full traveling city. It carried its own farms, its own repair bays, its own small army of drones for construction and defense. It carried enough weapons to fight a small war on its own, and enough crew quarters to house 10,000 people in comfort for years at a time. It was, in every sense that mattered, a fleet unto itself, a single ship that did not need support from any other. That was why the engineers who built it gave it a nickname that stuck long after the official reports were filed. They called it the Fleetship. Admiral Cross had commanded the Meridian since its final testing phase 2 years earlier. She knew every corridor, every system, every strange hum the engines made when they ran at full power. She also knew something that worried her more than any Vicari fleet ever could. Politicians back on Earth were starting to ask hard questions about the cost of the ship, and some of them wanted proof that the money had been well spent. That proof came in the form of an order that arrived on her desk on a quiet Tuesday morning. The order came from the Joint Earth Command, the body that oversaw all human military forces across the solar system and its growing colonies. It was short and direct. Intelligence reports showed that the Vicari Concord, a powerful alien coalition controlling a wide stretch of space near humanity's outer colonies, believed human ships were weak and fuel-starved. Diplomatic contact between Earth and the Concord had been cold and distant for years, full of careful words and no real trust. Recently, Vicari forces had begun moving ships toward a stretch of disputed space along the border between human and Concord territory, space that both sides claimed, but neither had fully settled. Earth's analysts believed the Vicari were preparing to test human resolve, perhaps even planning to seize contested systems, while humanity was seen as weak and slow. Joint Earth Command wanted a response that would not require a single shot fired. They wanted a message sent, one loud enough that no alien species could misunderstand it. The Meridian, humanity's greatest secret, would fly straight through the heart of Vicari space. It would enter through one edge of Concord territory and exit through the other, crossing their entire claimed border in a single unbroken journey, without stopping once to refuel, without asking permission, and without slowing down for anyone. It was, in simple terms, a demonstration. A message written not in words but in raw capability. If the Vicari truly believed humans could not travel far without fuel, then watching a human ship cross their entire territory without pause would tell them everything they needed to know about how wrong they were. Admiral Cross read the order twice, then called her senior officers together in the Meridian's command deck, a wide circular room near the top of the ship with windows of reinforced crystal glass looking out at the stars. Her second in command, a sharp young officer named Captain Rafael Ibarra, listened with his arms crossed as she explained the mission. "They want us to fly straight through Concord space," Rafael said slowly, "without any support, without any backup, past their patrols, past their border stations, and out the other side." "That's the plan," Cross said. They could see it as an act of war. They could, Cross agreed. "That's why we're not going to fire first. Not unless we have no other choice. This isn't a raid. It's a message. We want them to see us, to track us, to send every ship they have to watch us pass through, and to understand that we never once needed to stop." Raphael studied the star charts on the table between them. tracing the long red line that marked the planned route through Concord territory. It ran through no fewer than 11 star systems claimed by the Vicari, past 3 major shipyards, and directly beside what Concord records listed as one of their most heavily defended border posts. "They'll scramble everything they have," Raphael said. "Let them," Cross replied. "That's rather the point." Word of the mission spread quietly through the ship over the following days, whispered between engineers checking the reactor core, between soldiers cleaning weapons in the armory, between pilots running simulations in the flight bay. Some crew members were excited, eager to see their ship prove itself after years of quiet testing. Others were nervous, aware that flying alone into the heart of alien territory carried real risk, no matter how confident the engineers were in the ship's design. Dr. Amara Voss, the scientist who had first discovered the strange power source that ran the Meridian's core, came aboard personally to oversee the final checks before departure. She was older now, her hair fully gray, but her eyes still held the same sharp curiosity that had led her to the discovery a decade earlier. She walked through the reactor room, with Admiral Cross at her side, running her hand along the smooth metal casing that held the heart of the ship. "It won't fail," Voss said quietly. "I want you to understand that. This core has been running for 6 years without a single interruption. It could run for 60 more. There is no fuel gauge on this ship because there is nothing to measure. We are not carrying fuel. We are drawing power from the universe itself." "I understand the science," Cross said. "I need you to understand the politics. If this mission fails, if we're seen stopping even once, even for repairs, the Vicari will believe every rumor they ever heard about human weakness. And worse, our own people back home might start believing the ship was never worth building." Voss nodded slowly. "Then we will not stop." 3 days later, under a quiet gray dawn over the shipyards near Jupiter's orbit, the UES Meridian detached from its docking cradle and began its long journey toward the border of Vicari space. It moved without escort, without support ships, tense, without a single other vessel from Earth's fleet accompanying it. It was, by design, entirely alone. Back in Vicari territory, reports of a single unidentified human vessel moving toward the border reached Doran Vek's desk within hours of the Meridian, crossing into deep space. He read the reports with mild interest at first. A single ship, larger than any human vessel previously recorded, but still, in his mind, just another human ship. Another ship that would need fuel eventually. Another ship that would stop, sooner or later, at one of the many neutral stations scattered along the border, giving his patrols plenty of time to intercept, inspect, and if necessary, delay it indefinitely. He gave the order to prepare border patrols along the expected route, confident that the human ship, like every human ship before it, would need to stop. He had no idea how wrong he was about to be proven. Far above the quiet stars, the Meridian's massive engines glowed steady and bright, and deep within its hull, a small core drew power from the very fabric of space, ready to carry humanity's greatest secret straight through the heart of alien territory, without ever once slowing down. Doran Vek stood in the command center of Threshold Station, the largest Vicari outpost along the disputed border, watching a wall of screens that showed the slow crawl of the unknown human ship as it approached Concord space. The station itself was a marvel of Vicari engineering, a wheel-shaped structure nearly 10 kilometers across, built specifically to watch over the border and manage the network of refueling depots that stretched along it like beads on a long string. From here, Doran could see every ship that entered or left Concord territory, could track their fuel levels through careful sensor sweeps, and could plan, with confidence built over decades, exactly when and where any traveler would need to stop. The screens showed the human ship as a single bright dot, moving steadily toward the outer edge of Concord space. Beside the dot, a small data panel listed everything the station's sensors could determine. Size, approximately 3 kilometers in length, far larger than any previously recorded human vessel. Speed, steady, moderate, consistent with long-range cruising. Fuel signature, unclear. That last line bothered Doran more than he wanted to admit. Every other human ship the Concord had ever tracked gave off a clear fuel signature, a kind of energy trail that sensors could read easily, showing exactly how much fuel a ship carried and how quickly it burned through it. This new ship gave off almost nothing. Just a faint, steady hum of energy that did not match any known fuel type in Concord records. "Sensor error," said Lieutenant Fen Oric, a young Threll officer standing at the console beside Doran. "Has to be. Nothing runs that clean." "Recalibrate and check again," Doran said. Fen ran the check twice. Both times, the result came back the same. Whatever powered the human ship, it did not match any fuel signature in the Concord's vast database, built from centuries of studying every species they had ever encountered. Doran allowed himself a moment of doubt, then pushed it aside. Sensors could be wrong. New alloys, new shielding, strange hull materials could all distort readings in ways that confused even the best equipment. The simplest explanation, he reminded himself, was usually the right one. Humans needed fuel. Every species needed fuel. This ship was no different, whatever the sensors said. It would need to stop eventually, and when it did, the Concord's network of border stations would be ready. He called a meeting of his senior staff that evening, gathering them in a round briefing room near the top of Threshold Station, its curved windows looking out at the slow turn of stars beyond. Around the table sat representatives from all three Vakari peoples, Threll officers with their clicking mannerisms, Mornasi commanders speaking through small breathing devices that let them talk outside their water tanks, and Skarn strategists, who said little but listened carefully to everything. "The ship is human," Doran began, pulling up the star charts, showing its projected path. "Based on its current course, it appears to be heading directly into our territory, crossing not just the border, but a significant stretch of claimed space beyond it. If it continues on this path, it will pass near 11 systems under Concord control, including 3 of our shipyards and this very station." "A scouting mission," suggested Commander Eula Threep, a Mornasi officer whose voice carried a slight watery echo through her breathing device. "Testing our defenses." "Or a provocation," said General Ashka Dorn, a Skarn strategist known for his blunt manner. "Humans testing whether we will act against a single ship entering our space uninvited." "Whatever the purpose," Doran said, "our response should remain the same. We do not need to attack a single unarmed, or lightly armed, vessel to control this situation. We simply wait. Every ship needs fuel. This ship, whatever it is, will need to stop somewhere along its path. When it does, we intercept it calmly, inspect it, and decide our next steps from a position of strength, not panic." The room murmured agreement. It was, after all, the same strategy the Concord had used successfully for generations, a strategy built on patience and the certainty that no ship could travel forever without stopping. Doran gave the order to quietly reposition several patrol squadrons along the human ship's projected path, focusing especially on the refueling depots and neutral stations scattered through the systems it would pass. If the ship stopped at any of them, as every previous human vessel had done, Concord forces would be ready to meet it, calmly and without unnecessary aggression, but firmly enough to make clear that Concord space was not to be entered without permission. What Doran did not know, what none of his careful planning accounted for, was that the ship crossing into Concord space had no intention of stopping anywhere at all. Aboard the Meridian, life continued much as it had during the long months of testing near Earth, except now every crew member understood they were flying somewhere no human ship had ever gone before. Admiral Cross spent most of her waking hours on the command deck, watching sensor readings as the ship approached the first edge of Concord territory. Rafael Ibarra worked beside her, coordinating with the ship's tactical officers to track the movement of Vakari patrol ships that had begun quietly repositioning along their route. "They're moving ships toward the depots," Rafael said, studying a display that showed Concord patrol movements picked up by the Meridian's long-range sensors. "Looks like they expect us to stop somewhere along the way." "Of course they do," Cross said. "That's the whole plan. Let them keep expecting it." Dr. Amara Voss, who had stayed aboard for the full journey to monitor the reactor core personally, joined them on the command deck as the ship crossed the invisible line, marking the edge of Concord territory. The moment passed quietly, without fanfare, just a small notification on a star chart, showing the ship had officially entered contested space. No alarms sounded, no enemy ships appeared. The Meridian simply continued forward, steady and unhurried, its massive engines glowing with the same quiet light they always had. "How's the core?" Cross asked. "Perfect," Voss said. Not a single fluctuation. We could fly for years like this. Over the following days, as the Meridian moved deeper into Concord space, Vakari's sensors along the border picked up its steady progress, and reports flowed back to Doran Vek's desk with growing frequency. Each report told the same simple story. The human ship continued moving forward, at the same steady speed, without slowing, without stopping, without any sign of turning aside toward any of the refueling stations scattered along its path. At first, Doran dismissed the pattern as coincidence, a ship simply choosing a direct route rather than a stop at the nearest depot. But as day after day passed, and system after system reported the same ship continuing forward without pause, a small, uncomfortable doubt began to grow in the back of his mind. He called Fen Oric back to his office late one evening, pulling up the full record of the ship's journey so far. "Show me every depot along its path," he said. "Every station large enough to service a ship that size." Fen brought up the map, highlighting 7 major refueling depots directly along or near the Meridian's route, each one built specifically to service large vessels traveling long distances through Concord space. "It's passed within sensor range of 5 of these already," Fen said, "and it hasn't slowed down for any of them. Not even to check in, not even to request permission to dock. It's just flying past." Doran studied the map in silence for a long moment. "Increase sensor resolution on the ship itself," he finally said. "I want to know exactly what that reactor signature is. If it truly isn't burning fuel the way it should, I want proof, not guesses." Over the next 2 days, Concord scientists aboard nearby patrol ships focused every available sensor on the passing human vessel, gathering as much data as they could without directly approaching it. The results, when they finally reached Doran's desk, did nothing to calm his growing unease. The ship's power core, whatever it was, showed no measurable depletion over the entire length of its recorded journey. No drop in output. No sign of rationing power the way a ship running low on fuel typically would. If anything, the readings suggested the reactor was running exactly as steadily on its current day as it had been when first detected crossing the border, nearly 2 weeks earlier. "That's not possible," Fen said, staring at the data. "No fuel system runs that clean for that long." "Not ours, not anyone's." "And yet," Doran said quietly, "here we are." He brought the new information to the full council that evening, watching the same officers who had calmly agreed to a patient waiting strategy now shift uneasily in their seats as the data was laid out before them. "If this ship truly does not need to refuel," General Doran said slowly, "then everything we believed about human capability may be wrong. Not just about this ship, about all of them." "We don't know that yet," Doran said, though even as he said it, he felt less certain than he sounded. "It's possible this is an experimental vessel, a single prototype built for exactly this purpose. A demonstration meant to unsettle us. It's also possible our sensors are simply failing to read a fuel system built differently than our own." "And if neither is true," Commander Threep asked quietly, "if this is simply what human ships can do now?" No one answered her question, because no one had a good answer to give. Doran ordered a change in strategy that night. Rather than waiting for the ship to stop at a depot that it clearly had no intention of visiting, he ordered a full squadron of Concord warships to move into position along the ship's projected path, close enough to intercept it directly if necessary, far enough to avoid appearing openly hostile. He wanted eyes on that ship up close, sensors reading every detail they could gather, and if possible, direct communication opened with whoever commanded it. The order went out that night, and by morning, 12 Vakari warships had repositioned themselves along a stretch of open space, nearly 3 systems ahead of the Meridian's current position, forming a loose line meant to observe, and if needed, to stop the ship's advance. Aboard the Meridian, Admiral Cross received the sensor data, showing the Vakari fleet's movement with calm interest, rather than alarm. 12 ships, Raphael reported, moving into a blocking position roughly 2 days ahead of our current course. "Let them," Cross said. "We're not turning aside, and we're not slowing down. If they want to talk, we'll talk. If they want to test us, we'll show them exactly what this ship is capable of. But we do not stop, and we do not fire first." Dr. Voss, standing quietly near the reactor monitoring station, looked up at the star charts showing the growing distance between the Meridian and Earth, and the shrinking distance between it and the waiting Vakari fleet. 2 days, she said softly. 2 days until they get their answer. Far ahead, along a quiet stretch of contested space, the Vicari fleet held its position, waiting for a ship that its own sensors insisted should be running low on fuel by now. A ship that should, by every rule the Concorde had built its entire military strategy around, be desperate for a place to stop. Instead, deep within the Meridian's hull, the reactor core continued its steady, silent hum, drawing power from the very fabric of space itself, utterly untouched by the 2 weeks of hard travel already behind it, and utterly unconcerned with the fleet now gathering somewhere ahead, waiting to test a belief that was already beginning, quietly, to fall apart. The 12 Vicari warships held their position in a loose crescent formation, spread across a wide stretch of empty space between 2 dim red stars. Doran Vec watched the scene from the flagship of the squadron, a heavy cruiser named the Thresh's Vigil, standing on its command deck with his hands clasped behind his back, watching a long-range sensor display that showed the steady approach of the human vessel. 2 days had passed since he ordered the blocking formation into place. In that time, the human ship had not changed course, had not changed speed, and had not responded to any of the 3 attempts at communication his forces had sent along its projected path. The silence bothered him almost as much as the ship's strange, unwavering power readings. Still no response to our hails, Fenoric reported from a nearby console. He had come along on this mission personally, at Doran's request, eager to see up close whatever it was they were dealing with. "Send a 4th message," Doran said. "This time, make clear we intend no hostility. We simply request they identify themselves and their intentions before proceeding further into Concorde space." The message went out, translated carefully into the simple trade language most species along the border had come to use for exactly this kind of first contact situation. It repeated the same basic request as the previous 3 attempts. Identify yourselves. State your intentions. Concorde space ahead is closely monitored. Please respond. For a long moment, nothing happened. The human ship continued its steady approach, now less than 6 hours from the waiting Concorde squadron, its massive form growing larger with each passing sensor sweep. Then, finally, a response came through. The voice that reached the Thresh's Vigil was calm, clear, and translated smoothly through the same trade protocols the Concorde had used to reach out. It belonged to a human woman, her tone measured and unhurried, carrying none of the nervousness Doran might have expected from a lone ship facing a squadron of 12 warships. "This is Admiral Elena Cross, of the United Earthship Meridian," the voice said. "We acknowledge your hails. Our intentions are peaceful. We are conducting a long-range survey mission through this region, and do not intend to interfere with Concorde territory or assets. We request safe passage to continue our course." Doran exchanged a glance with Fen. "A survey mission," he repeated quietly. "Crossing 11 systems of Concorde territory. Should I respond?" Fen asked. "Let me," Doran said. He stepped closer to the console and spoke carefully into the open channel. "Admiral Cross, this is General Doran Vec, of the Vicari Concorde Defense Forces. Your ship has been traveling through Concorde territory for nearly 2 weeks without stopping at any registered station or depot. Our sensors indicate no depletion in your vessel's power reserves during this time, which is, to put it plainly, inconsistent with any fuel system we are familiar with. We would appreciate clarification before allowing you to proceed further." There was a short pause before Cross responded, and when she did, her voice carried the faintest note of something that might have been amusement, though it was hard to tell through the translation. "Our ship does not require refueling in the way you may be used to, General. It draws power from a source that does not deplete the way conventional fuel does. I understand this may be difficult to believe, but I assure you, it is simply the truth." Doran's jaw tightened slightly, though his voice remained steady. "Forgive me, Admiral, but the Concorde has centuries of experience studying fuel systems from dozens of species. No source of power exists that does not, in some way, deplete over time. We would like the opportunity to inspect your vessel directly, to better understand this technology and ensure it poses no threat to Concorde space." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Cross replied. "Our mission does not include stopping for inspection. We intend to continue our course through this region and exit Concorde territory on the far side within the next several days. We have no wish for conflict, General, and we will not fire unless fired upon. But we will not be stopping." The calm certainty in her voice, unsettled Doran more than any threat could have. He had expected, if anything, nervous excuses, perhaps a request for a short stop at a nearby depot to maintain the appearance of normal ship behavior. Instead, he was being told, plainly and without hesitation, that the ship simply intended to keep going, regardless of the 12 warships currently blocking its path. He muted the channel and turned to his officers. "Options," he said simply. "We could force the issue," General Dorn said, his voice as blunt as ever. 12 ships against one, even a large one, gives us significant advantage in a direct confrontation. "We don't know its full capabilities," Commander Threep cautioned. "A ship built to travel this far without refueling may carry defenses we have not accounted for either." "We are not here to start a war," Doran said firmly. "Our orders are to observe, gather information, and prevent unauthorized incursion into Concord territory if reasonably possible. Forcing a confrontation with an unknown vessel of this size, based on incomplete information, would be reckless." "Then what do you propose?" Dorn asked. Doran studied the star charts for a long moment before answering. "We block its path directly. Not to attack, but to force a stop. If the ship truly intends no hostility, it will have no choice but to slow down and negotiate further, rather than risk collision with our formation. That will buy us time to gather more information, and perhaps convince the humans to allow a proper inspection." The order went out, and the 12 Vakari warships shifted formation, moving into a tight defensive line directly across the Meridian's projected path, close enough together that no ship, however large, could easily pass through without either stopping or risking a collision. Aboard the Meridian, Rafael Ibarra watched the Vakari formation tighten on the tactical display with a low whistle. "They're forming a wall," he said. "Looks like they mean to force us to stop whether we like it or not." Admiral Cross studied the formation calmly. "Distance to their line?" 4 hours at current speed, Rafael reported. "Options?" Cross asked, turning to her tactical officer, a sharp-eyed woman named Commander Priya Nandakumar. "We could alter course slightly to avoid direct collision," Priya said, "but that would mean slowing down to navigate around their formation, which defeats the purpose of the mission. Alternatively, we maintain course and speed, and trust the ship's shielding to handle any attempt they make to physically block our path." "What's the risk if we simply continue straight through?" Cross asked. Priya pulled up a detailed model of the Meridian's shielding capacity, compared to the estimated firepower of 12 Vakari cruisers. Based on intelligence estimates of their weapon systems, even a full combined barrage from all 12 ships would not breach our primary shielding. We could take direct fire from their entire formation and continue forward largely unaffected, assuming our estimates of their weapons technology are accurate. "And if our estimates are wrong?" Raphael asked quietly. "Then we adjust," Cross said. "But I don't intend to turn this ship around, because a handful of cruisers decided to stand in our way. Maintain current course and speed. If they open fire, we will not return it, unless our shields show genuine strain. If they attempt to physically block our path without firing, we hold course, and let them decide whether they truly intend to ram a ship 3 times their size." The order was given, and the Meridian continued forward, steady and unhurried, its massive form growing steadily larger on Vakari sensors as the 4 hours ticked away. Back aboard the Thresh's Vigil, Doran watched the same approach with mounting tension. The human ship showed no sign of altering course, no sign of slowing, nothing to suggest it intended to do anything other than continue directly toward the waiting Concord line. "They're not slowing down," Fenn reported, an edge of nervousness creeping into his voice for the first time. "If this continues, they'll reach our formation in under 2 hours, still at full speed." "Hold the line," Doran ordered, though even as he said it, doubt gnawed at the edges of his confidence. They will not risk a collision with 12 warships. They will slow down, or they will alter course. No sane commander risks their vessel and crew in a direct confrontation they cannot be certain of winning. But as the minutes ticked away, and the massive shape of the Meridian continued to grow on every sensor screen aboard the Thresh's Vigil, showing no sign of slowing, no sign of turning, Doran began to understand, with a growing and uncomfortable certainty, that whatever the humans believed about their own ship's capabilities, they believed it completely. An hour before contact, Doran opened the channel to the Meridian one final time. "Admiral Cross," he said, keeping his voice as level as he could manage. "You are on a direct collision course with our formation. I strongly urge you to alter course or reduce speed before we are forced to consider your approach an act of aggression." The response came back just as calm as before. "General Vec, we have no intention of colliding with your ships, nor do we intend to fire upon them. But we will not be altering our course. I would suggest, respectfully, that your formation consider whether blocking the path of a fully shielded vessel 3 times your combined mass is truly a wise use of your ships and your crew's lives. The choice of what happens next belongs entirely to you." The channel went quiet, and aboard the Thresh's vigil, 12 Vakari warships held their tight defensive line, watching the massive shape of humanity's greatest secret bear down on them at full, unbroken speed, with less than an hour remaining before they would learn, one way or another, exactly what kind of ship they were truly facing. The final hour passed in near total silence aboard the Thresh's vigil. Doran Vec stood rigid at his command station, watching the massive shape of the Meridian grow larger and larger on every sensor display, until it was no longer a distant dot, but a vast, looming shadow that dwarfed the entire Vakari formation arrayed before it. 12 warships, each one a proud symbol of Concord strength, now looked small and fragile compared to the single vessel bearing down on them without the slightest sign of slowing. 30 minutes to contact, Fen Oric reported, his voice tight. "They're still holding full speed." Doran felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Every instinct built over decades of careful, measured command told him that no reasonable commander would risk a direct collision, that the human ship must be bluffing, testing Concord resolve to see if the blockade would break first. But another part of him, the part that had watched the reactor readings show no depletion over 2 full weeks of travel, the part that remembered the calm, unshaken certainty in Admiral Cross's voice, began to wonder if he was dealing with a species that simply did not bluff the way the Concord expected. "General," Commander Threep said quietly from her station, her voice carrying its usual watery echo, "if we hold this line and they do not stop, we risk losing ships and crew for nothing. If we break the line and let them pass, we risk showing weakness before a fleet we still do not fully understand. There may be no good option here." "There is one option we have not fully considered," General Dorn said. "We could open fire now, before contact, forcing them to either stop, alter course, or take damage that slows them regardless of their intentions." Doran considered this for a long moment. Firing first carried its own risks, both political and practical, but allowing the ship to simply pass through unchallenged, after everything the Concord had built its border strategy around, felt like an admission of failure he was not ready to make. 15 minutes, Fen reported. "Prepare a warning volley," Doran finally ordered. "Aim to pass close to their hull, not to strike directly. If they do not respond by altering course, we escalate to direct fire on their forward shields only. I want to test their defenses, not destroy their ship. We still need answers more than we need a battle." The order went out, and the 12 Vakari warships adjusted their weapon systems, targeting a wide spread of warning shots, designed to pass close enough to the Meridian's hull to be unmistakably threatening, without any real intention of causing damage. Aboard the Meridian, Commander Priya Nandakumar watched the Vakari weapon systems power up on her tactical display. "They're arming weapons," she reported calmly. "Targeting solutions suggest warning shots rather than a direct attack pattern, likely intended to test our response." "Hold course," Admiral Cross said. "Do not raise weapons in response. Let them see we are not reacting with aggression." The warning volley fired moments later, a spread of bright energy bolts streaking past the Meridian's hull, close enough to rattle sensor readings, but far enough to avoid any actual contact. Aboard the command deck, several younger crew members flinched instinctively at the display, but Admiral Cross remained still, watching the readings with calm patience. "Shields report no impact," Priya confirmed. As expected, it was a warning shot, not a direct attack. "Maintain course," Cross repeated. "Open a channel to General Vec." The channel connected, and Cross spoke with the same level tone she had used throughout the entire exchange. "General Vec, I understand that was a warning. I want to make something clear before this goes any further. My ship will not slow, will not alter course, and will not stop advancing. If you fire directly upon us, we will not return fire unless our shields show genuine damage, but we will also not be deterred. I would ask you to consider very carefully whether continuing this confrontation serves any purpose for either of our peoples. Aboard the Thresh's vigil, Doran listened to the message with a growing, uncomfortable weight settling in his chest. Every option available to him now led toward the same uncertain outcome. Either the Concord fleet stood aside and let the human ship pass, an outcome that would undermine decades of carefully built strategic doctrine, or the fleet escalated toward direct conflict against a vessel whose true capabilities remained largely unknown, based on nothing more than pride and the fear of appearing weak. 10 minutes, Fenn reported quietly. Doran made his decision. Open full communications to the Meridian, he said. Direct visual channel, if their systems allow it. A moment later, the request was accepted, and a display appeared on the Thresh's Vigil's main screen, showing the calm face of Admiral Elena Cross, standing on her own command deck, the Meridian's vast interior visible behind her, filled with quiet, focused crew members, going about their duties, without any sign of the tension Doran felt in his own chest. Admiral Cross, Doran said, allowing a note of genuine curiosity to enter his voice for the first time since the confrontation began. I will be direct with you, since further posturing serves neither of us well. Our entire military doctrine, built over centuries, holds that no ship travels indefinitely without resupply. Your vessel has now traveled for over 2 weeks through contested space, showing no depletion in power reserves whatsoever. I find myself needing to understand how this is possible, not as a threat, but simply as a matter of genuine curiosity, before I decide how the Concord should respond to your continued advance. Cross studied him for a moment before responding, and something in her expression softened slightly, as though she recognized the difficult position Doran now found himself in. General Vec, 10 years ago, our scientists discovered a way to draw a small, steady stream of energy directly from the underlying structure of space itself, the same quantum background that exists everywhere in the universe, including right where your own ships are currently sitting. It does not run out, because it does not depend on any stored resource the way conventional fuel does. This ship, the Meridian, was built specifically to prove this technology works, and to demonstrate to any doubters, whether human or otherwise, exactly what it means for a fleet to no longer depend on fuel lines at all. Doran absorbed this information in silence, feeling the full weight of its implications settle over him. If even a fraction of what she described was true, then the entire strategic doctrine the Concord had built its military planning around for centuries, the doctrine that assumed every enemy fleet could eventually be starved into submission by cutting off its fuel, was no longer valid, at least not against humanity. If this is true, he finally said, then our two peoples may need to reconsider a great deal about how we understand one another. I agree, Cross said, which is why I would ask you again, General, to allow us safe passage through the remainder of this region. We have demonstrated what we came to demonstrate. We have no wish to fight your fleet, and we have no interest in claiming Concord territory. We simply wanted your leadership to understand, clearly and directly, exactly what kind of fleet Earth now commands, so that any future disagreements between our peoples can be settled through honest negotiation, rather than assumptions that no longer hold true. Doran looked around his command deck at the tense, watching faces of his officers, then back at the calm, steady image of Admiral Cross on his main screen. He thought of the 12 warships under his command, of the years of doctrine that had brought him to this moment, and of the simple, unavoidable truth now sitting before him. A fleet that did not need fuel was a fleet that could not be starved, could not be cornered by supply lines, and could not be predicted using any strategy the Concord had ever relied upon. Stand down weapons, he finally ordered, his voice quiet but firm. Open the formation, allow the Meridian safe passage through the remainder of Concord space. Around him, his officers exchanged uncertain glances, but no one questioned the order. Slowly, the tight defensive line of 12 Vakari warships began to part, opening a clear path directly ahead of the approaching human vessel. Aboard the Meridian, Rafael Ibarra watched the Concord formation break apart with quiet relief. They're standing down, he reported. Path is clear. Maintain course and speed, Cross said, though a small measure of tension eased from her own shoulders as well. Thank you, General Vec, she said into the open channel. I believe this is the beginning of a much more honest understanding between our peoples. Perhaps, Doran said. Though I suspect, Admiral, that understanding will take considerable time to fully settle in. You have just proven something to us today that will need to be explained very carefully to a great many people who will not easily believe it. Then I hope you'll forgive us, Cross said, allowing the faintest note of dry humor into her voice, for choosing to prove it directly, rather than simply telling you, and hoping you would believe our word alone. The Meridian continued forward, passing directly through the gap in the Vicari formation, without pause, its massive engines glowing steady and unbroken, exactly as they had for the past 2 weeks, exactly as they would continue to glow for the remainder of its long journey across the entire breadth of Concord territory. Behind it, the 12 Vicari warships held their position, watching the ship shrink slowly into the distance, carrying with it a truth that would soon spread through every level of Vicari command, a truth that would force the entire Concord to reconsider everything they believed they understood about the young, quiet species they had spent decades assuming was too weak and too fuel-starved to ever pose a genuine challenge. News of the Meridian's crossing traveled through the Vicari Concord faster than any official report could keep pace with. By the time Doran Vek's formal account reached the Concord's Central Council, rumors had already spread through a dozen border stations, carried by nervous officers who had watched the human ship pass through their systems without pause, and by traders who had seen it glide past their small vessels, like a mountain sliding silently through open water. The Central Council of the Vicari Concord met 3 days after the Meridian finally exited Concord territory on the far side of the border, emerging into open space beyond the last claimed system, without ever once slowing its steady, unbroken pace. The council chamber, built deep within the ancient homeworld of the Threll people, was a wide circular room where representatives from all 3 founding species gathered to decide matters too large for any single military command to settle alone. Doran Vek stood before the full council, delivering his report in person rather than trusting the details to a written summary alone. He described the ship's steady approach, the failed attempts to force a stop, the tense standoff before the blocking formation, and finally, the conversation with Admiral Cross that had convinced him to stand down rather than risk a confrontation whose outcome he could not confidently predict. For 300 years, Doran said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, our entire military doctrine has rested on a single dependable truth. Every fleet needs fuel, and every fleet that needs fuel can eventually be controlled, delayed, or defeated, simply by controlling its supply lines. This truth has guided every war we have fought, every peace we have negotiated, every border we have drawn. I stood before a single human ship 3 weeks ago, and watched that truth fail completely. A ripple of uneasy murmurs passed through the council chamber. Several representatives exchanged worried glances, while others sat in stunned silence, absorbing the full weight of what Doran was telling them. Are we certain, asked an older Skarn representative near the back of the chamber, that this was not some kind of trick? A single ship built for demonstration, carrying hidden fuel reserves designed to fool our sensors? I considered that possibility myself, Doran admitted. But our sensors tracked that ship continuously for nearly 3 weeks, across the entire breadth of our territory. If it was hiding fuel reserves large enough to sustain a vessel of that size for that long, undetected by every sensor array along its path, then the technology required to hide such reserves would itself represent a far greater threat than anything we have previously imagined. I do not believe that to be the case. I believe, based on everything I observed, that the humans have genuinely developed a power source that does not deplete the way our own technology does. The chamber fell into a heavy, uncertain silence. For generations, the Vicari Concord had built its entire understanding of galactic power around the assumption that fuel, ultimately, decided every conflict. A species that no longer needed to worry about fuel at all represented something the Concord strategists had never truly prepared for. What do you recommend, General? Asked the presiding chairwoman, an elder Mornasi representative named Isla Verne, her voice calm despite the tension in the room. Doran considered his answer carefully before speaking. I recommend we abandon any plan that assumes human forces can be pressured or contained through supply lines or fuel denial. I further recommend we open direct diplomatic contact with Earth's leadership, not from a position of assumed superiority, as we have approached them in the past, but as genuine equals, given what we now understand about their capabilities. The alternative, continuing to plan for conflict based on outdated assumptions, risks catastrophic miscalculation. The council debated for hours after Doran's report, weighing old doctrines against this new, uncomfortable truth. Some representatives argued for caution, for continued military buildup to counter whatever advantage humanity now held. Others argued, more persuasively as the debate continued, that a species capable of building a ship like the Meridian, and choosing to demonstrate its power through a single unarmed crossing, rather than an act of aggression, was signaling a clear preference for peaceful coexistence rather than conquest. In the end, the council voted, by a narrow but clear margin, to send a formal diplomatic delegation to Earth, requesting direct talks between Concord leadership and Earth's Joint Command, aimed at establishing clearer boundaries, trade agreements, and a foundation of mutual understanding that had been sorely missing from the cold, distant relationship the two powers had maintained for years. Back on Earth, the Meridian's return was met with far less public fanfare than its mission might have suggested, since the full details of its journey remained classified for security reasons even after its safe return to Jupiter's orbit. But within the halls of Joint Earth Command, the mission was quietly hailed as an overwhelming success. Admiral Cross delivered her full report personally to the assembled Joint Command Council, describing the tense standoff at the Vicari blocking formation, and the eventual, careful agreement to allow safe passage. They stood down, Cross told the assembled officials, not because we threatened them, but because we showed them, clearly and undeniably, exactly what our capabilities were. I believe this opens a genuine path toward peaceful relations with the Concord, provided we approach the coming negotiations honestly and without unnecessary provocation. The budget skeptics who had once questioned the enormous cost of building the Meridian found themselves with little left to argue, as reports of the mission's success quietly reshaped opinions throughout Earth's political leadership. Funding for a second fleet ship, already tentatively approved before the mission but slowed by lingering doubts, moved forward with renewed confidence in the weeks that followed. Dr. Amara Voss, who had spent a decade of her life perfecting the technology that made the Meridian's journey possible, watched the ship settle back into its familiar docking cradle near Jupiter's orbit with quiet satisfaction. She stood beside Admiral Cross on an observation deck overlooking the vast shipyard, watching engineering crews begin the careful process of preparing the ship for its next assignment. 10 years of secrecy, Voss said softly, and in the end, all it took was one ship refusing to stop. Sometimes, Cross said, the simplest demonstrations carry the most weight. We didn't need to fight a war to prove what humanity is capable of. We just needed to keep going, calmly, past every expectation they had of us. 3 months later, the first formal diplomatic meeting between Earth's Joint Command and a full delegation from the Vicari Concord took place aboard a neutral space station, positioned along the border both powers had once viewed with deep suspicion. Doran Vec himself attended as part of the Concord delegation, having earned a measure of respect among his own people for his careful handling of the Meridian crossing, rather than blame for having allowed a foreign ship to pass unchallenged through Concord territory. He met Admiral Cross in person for the first time, during a quiet break in the formal negotiations, standing together near a wide observation window, looking out over the slow drift of stars beyond. I confess, Doran said, I did not expect our first true conversation to happen under such calmer circumstances than our last. Neither did I, Cross admitted, though I'm glad it worked out this way, General. There was never any reason our two peoples needed to become enemies, over old assumptions that simply no longer held true. No, Doran agreed. Though I suspect it will take my own people considerably longer to fully accept just how much has changed. 300 years of careful strategy do not unravel easily, even in the face of clear proof. Change rarely happens all at once, Cross said, but I think this is a solid beginning. Behind them, the ongoing negotiations continued, slowly building the framework for a new understanding between two powers that had once viewed each other through the narrow lens of old assumptions and untested doctrine. It would take years, both sides understood, to fully settle every disagreement, every border dispute, every lingering suspicion built over decades of distant, cautious contact. But for the first time since first encountering the Vicari Concord, humanity's leadership found itself negotiating, not from a position of assumed weakness, but as genuine equals, backed by a demonstration of capability that could not be argued away or dismissed as coincidence. Far beyond the border where the negotiations continued, the UES Meridian rested quietly in its docking cradle above Jupiter, its reactor core still humming with the same steady, unbroken rhythm it had maintained for over a decade, ready, whenever it was called upon again, to carry humanity's quiet message of capability to whatever corner of the galaxy still doubted what a single, well-built ship, and a species willing to prove itself through action, rather than words, could truly accomplish. And though the Vakari Concord would spend years rebuilding their understanding of galactic power around this new truth, one lesson from that quiet, tense crossing remained fixed clearly in Doran Vek's mind, a lesson he would carry with him through every future negotiation with Earth's growing fleet. Never again assume a fleet needs to stop, simply because every fleet you have ever known has needed to.